We now hopefully understood the logic behind our Git and GitHub interaction, but up to this point we basically started with an empty repository in GitHub, which we then kind of filled with the information that we created locally. What if we want to get access to an existing GitHub repository, like the one that we have right now? Well, for this case, I opened a new Visual Studio Code instance again, and I'll create a new folder, and I'll call it clone here, because what we will do now is we will run git clone, another git command, which will allow us to clone an existing remote repository into our folder here, and with that turn it into a local repository. We have this folder created, you know how this works. We now drag it into our VS Code instance, close the screen, and now this is it. We don't have to do anything else, well, besides bringing up our good old panel again maybe, because now if we switch back to our GitHub repository, so I'm here on code, and here you have the master branch and all the other branches. I'm currently in this master branch, and in here you now have this code button. And if you click onto it, you can find this clone option up here and a URL. Well, if we copy this by clicking onto this button and go back to our VS Code instance, and now we can simply enter git clone, so a new git command. As I said, it will clone a remote repository into our local folder here. So we clone this URL, very important. As you saw, I didn't initialize Git here, so it's just an empty project folder here. Let's do that. Now we are cloning this entire repository, this entire project into our clone folder. You can see that cloning was successful. We have this GitHub Basics folder now. Very important, if you try to run a git command right here now, like git status, this does not work because we are not in a Git repository. The reason for this is that the GitHub Basics folder here contains the .git file, so our repository. Therefore, if you navigate into our GitHub Basics folder and now run git status, we see this is working. We can use Git as we are used to. Let me make this a bit bigger again. So now we have access to this repository, and if we check our branch command, we see we have a master branch here. We'll see if it's a local tracking branch soon. If we check all our branches, we see we have access to our master branch and also to all our remote tracking branches. As we learned, the head is currently origin master. And if we run git branch -vv, we see that master indeed is a local tracking branch. And this is where the concepts we learned in the last lectures now come together. We cloned a remote repository, now have a local repository which contains all the information of this remote repository. In this repository, we have a master branch, which is a local tracking branch, which is tracking origin master. So basically, this remote tracking branch here, which then is basically a copy of the remote master branch in our remote repository. If you now want to work on the feature branch in here, for example, what do you do then? You create a local tracking branch which refers to this remote tracking branch, and we do this simply by git branch track right here. Now the branch name, as we learned, this should be named equally, so it should be named origin/feature here. And which branch should it track? Well, it should track remotes origin feature, like this. We now have this feature branch set up. So if we check all our branches, we see we have a local tracking branch for master and a local tracking branch for origin feature. If we again run git branch -vb, you see the confirmation for this logic. By the way, the fact that remotes is added up here in front just is due to the fact that I added remotes here as the branch I was referring to. Origin feature would still be the same. Whenever we use slashes in here, we are referring to local branches, so branches on our machine in the end. Therefore, this just depends on how you created it here. So this is how we can now interact with such branches from a cloned repository. What if we add a branch now locally? Well, let's do this by checking out a new branch based on our master branch here, which should be called maybe feature local again, right? So it was created locally. We have that branch. Let's explore the branch logic. So we can see it right here. Is it referring to anything? No, it is not. That's important. So we created a new branch, but this branch is now not a reference to any other remote tracking branch. So keep this in mind. This means in this feature local branch, if we access that folder, we could now create a file, maybe file1.txt, something like this. Let's add a commit here. Added file1.txt like this. And now how can we push this change now to our remote repository? Well, simply with git push origin feature local, right? Here we have to enter origin and feature local, so the location of our remote repository and the name of the branch, because we're not referring to a remote tracking branch here at the moment. Therefore, we explicitly have to tell Git to, well, push that new branch. With that, a new remote tracking branch will be created. And because of that, also a new remote branch will be created on GitHub. Let's check GitHub quickly and reload it here. And check our branches. Here you see our feature local branch, which we just built. And if we go back now and clear this and run git branch -a, you see we now also have a remote, a remote tracking branch of that new branch we just created. The problem still is with git branch -vb that at the moment this feature local branch doesn't refer to any kind of, well, remote tracking branch. So how can we turn it into a local tracking branch? Well, first by checking out the master, right? Then we'll remove that local branch, which it is at the moment. So feature local will be removed like this. And now we can simply say we want to create a new branch, a tracking branch, a local tracking branch, which refers to origin feature local like this. With that being set up, we can again check git branch -vb. And now I made a mistake. Now I forgot to add the actual branch name. Therefore, we now created a new branch named origin feature local, which you can see right here, which is then automatically tracking the master branch. Well, that's not what we want here. This is of course my bad. So let's get rid of this new branch. So branch -d origin feature local. This was not intended. So now we have this branch deleted. So, and let's now say git branch --track. Now it should be named feature local, and this branch should track origin /feature local like this. Now this works, and if we now check our branch, you see we have the feature local, the master, and the origin feature branch. And if we see, if we have any local tracking branches, we see that feature local is tracking origin feature local, master is tracking the master, and origin feature is tracking origin feature. So this is how git clone works and how we can implement all the concepts we previously learned in here in such a clone project. Generally, you can say if you want to fill an empty GitHub repository with live, then you use the first approach. So you first push the information to that empty repository. If you want to access an existing repository, you typically clone it and then follow it along the way we did it here, either by accessing existing branches, by creating a local tracking branch, or by creating a new branch locally, then pushing it to the remote repository and then either deleting it or then again pulling it and creating a local tracking branch finally. Do you remember the beginning of this module when we used the push command, where we had a new branch in here, we pushed it then to GitHub? Well, back then you saw in the recommendation on the GitHub page that we should use git push -u to push the local change to the Git repository. I skipped this back then, and now is the time to come back to this. For this, I'll first create a new branch and maybe call it feature upstream, because the U stands for upstream. So we have this new branch, and in here, well, I'll create a new file and call it maybe upstream.txt. So as you know, with this change being added and committed, we can now use git push origin and then feature upstream, for example, to bring this branch to our GitHub repository. However, if we do that, and that's what we also saw in the last video, then we have kind of the problem that there is no real connection as we learned throughout the course. So we don't have this remote branch, remote tracking branch, and local tracking branch logic. So we have to create a local tracking branch on our own. Well, if we use git push -u origin and then the branch name, well, things look a bit different. Let's do this now and let's see why. So we do this. And down here, well, you can see that we created a new branch on GitHub, no surprise here. But now the branch feature upstream is set up to track the remote branch feature upstream from origin. Now, what does this mean? Oops. Well, if we check our branches, you see we have that feature upstream branch, right? And if I check the details for our branches, you see that with that -u, we created a local tracking branch just with this command. So this again ties into the concepts we learned earlier. That's why I skipped it previously, but now you know why -u can be helpful. Otherwise, you have to follow the approach shown in the last lecture with, well, pushing the data, as I said, and then deleting the branch, creating a new one, and so on. So that was a quicker video, but now you also know what the upstream is and how you can create new branches which are automatically set as the upstream.